that stretched both fore and aft to cut net. We're now coming to the area, the aft dive planes and the 2 counter-rotating propellers that could drive these submarines in excess of 20 knots. These craft were incredible technological achievements designed by the Imperial Japanese Navy to be used not as a stealth weapon, but as a craft which launched from a larger mothership would swarm in groups of 12 in an all-out open sea battle to engage the enemy. As Pearl Harbor was being planned, the Ko Hayoteki Corps, the young men who were training to use these submarines, insisted they be given an opportunity to participate, and after much debate, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto agreed to let them go, but enjoined them not to die and to come home. Only one would. 9 of the 10 who were deployed that morning were lost with their craft. Only one man survived when his submarine washed ashore. That man, Kazuo Sakamaki, would become America's first prisoner of war. His craft, recovered, studied, analyzed, and then shipped around the country, would be used to sell war bonds in more than 2,000 American cities. We're joined on this dive by a number of folks ashore, as I've said, including the discoverers of these submarines from the University of Hawaii's Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory. HURL, and I've got to say that's one of the best acronyms in ocean exploration I've ever heard, guys, has been at this for a long time. Steve Price, Terry Kirby, Colin Wallerman, Max Kramer, all of their colleagues, Chris Kelly, have been working for years, making incredible dives using these manned submersibles to learn more about what lies out here. That has included analyzing many reports, sonar maps of the area, and then diving as opportunities arise. On August 28th, 2002, they discovered this submarine and have returned from time to time to document it and to carry some of us, myself and Hans van Tilburg also joining us, into the depths, as well as Russ Matthews, who's also joined us. Terry, Chris, you guys, you should probably share a little bit about the discovery of this sub. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, that was after 10 years of using whatever dives we could to try and find the sub. And the first year, 1992, of those 10 years is when we came across the stern section of what we didn't realize at the time was the 5th and final sub. But with the 3 days that we had to find this, we finally found it on our 3rd and last day. If we hadn't found it then, it would have been another year to try and get to this target. So it was pretty exciting seeing this come out of the dark after that, after 10 years of searching for it. When we went around, and we were pretty excited about this discovery, everybody was pretty high. We went around and we looked at that hole in the conning tower, and it really sobered everybody up because we realized the crew were still in there. So that was really broken away up here forward.
Well, I'll add a few comments too. The submarine was located after an extensive side scan sonar mapping project that had occurred about 6 months before the discovery. And the big problem was that there's a lot of objects down in the defensive sea area and outside the defensive sea area that have been discarded over the years. And so there's many targets that showed up on the side scan, and it was a matter of actually trying to weed through it and pick the best target that could be this submarine. And this caught Terry in my eye immediately, this particular target, and that's what helped locate it.
Yeah, we came up with Chris's survey. It came up with 39 possible targets, and we had 3 days to try and pick the best one. And this is our first choice, and on the 3rd day, finally got to it.
Yeah, just a couple of other comments. We dove on this particular target the very first day, and we missed it. And I think that's in your book, Jim. We missed it by just 90 feet or so. It really is small and hard to see. And I was ready to move on to check out some of the other targets on that third dive, but Terry insisted he wanted another go at this target, and that was an absolutely correct decision to make, because we gave it another chance and found it on that third dive.
Perforations on the sail? Just dark sail?
One thing I want to just point out to everybody that's listening in, when all of us do our work, for the most part, either we're doing it by diving with each other in scuba or with a few of us inside the submersibles. And with the Pisces subs, there's 3 that go. So through the years, some of us have been privileged to see these sites, to work on them. But the power of the system now that we're working with enables us to share this with you and live. You're seeing it just as we see it. You're able to hear these stories, and as I said earlier, hear not only from folks like those who found these subs and have been working on them, but other scientists who have insights to offer. There are corrosion experts, marine biologists. We have the participation of historians who have been actively working with Japanese and American sources. I know we have Tony Tully on the line, well known for his historical research. So many others, and they, as well as all of you, are able to see this and to learn from it, to make observations. And that's what science should be. It should be open, accessible, and transparent. That's why I joined NOAA. That's why I'm proud to be on this ship working with this crew and working with everybody ashore as we bring you this live for the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Chris,
Jim, can we turn the lasers on and get a measurement at the top of the steering gap?
Roger that. Lasers coming on. So for those of you watching, there's 2 red dots that are showing up right now, and those are lasers, and they enable us. They're 10 centimeters apart. So what this enables us to do is measure this gap. We can't just go down there in 1,300 feet and slap a tape on it. So what this does is give us an opportunity to see how far this thing is going apart. And all science, of course, involves at its basic level measurement. As they're measuring this, by the way, USS Ward went on to a long and distinguished career before finally succumbing to kamikaze attack and being sunk towards the end of the war. Before that happened, she'd been reconditioned into a more modernized version of a destroyer, and the number 3 gun, which had fired the first shot, had been removed. Because of its historical significance, it was saved, and today it rests on the grounds of the state capitol there in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. It was put there in 1958 and dedicated in the presence of the surviving crew, most of whom were still there, including Outerbridge. And the gun remains and is the subject of observances today. There's a round table taking place out there in Minneapolis with World War II veterans for the occasion. And the gun, perhaps one of the most important of Minnesota's World War II memorials, is a prominent focal point for people that come and visit the state capitol grounds. So, Chris, while we're doing this, maybe you want to share with folks some of the marine biological observations.
Sorry, I was outside talking to some people watching from the outside of the ECC here. Yeah, there's a number of corals. These are sea fans. that are growing on the hull, and I've pointed out a few of them in the event log. And so it is being colonized by filter feeding animals. We did see that crab earlier on the periscope. That's in the family Galatheidae. Or they actually call them squat lobsters. And then many of you probably saw that wonderful octopus that was first appeared on the stern on the Sirius view from camera 2, and he crawls his way all the way to the conning tower to get into the limelight. He wanted to get on the TV as well. And so octopus are very, very difficult to identify. So that's about as far as I can go on that guy. But then there's a lot of the smaller stuff. These could be bacteria, foraminifera, and there's been a bunch of urchins and some barnacles I've seen in hyperzoans. So quite a lot of life that's already on the sub after 75 years.
Excellent. I think the one thing that we keep seeing as we explore these out here is that the deep ocean is a repository not just for history, but it is full of life at different sizes and levels. And in this case, a reminder that while this submarine sunk 75 years ago is a war grave as well as a historic site, it is also now the habitat for a variety of marine life that grow here and are part of the marine ecosystem. Also joining...
This gap looks similar to us, Jim, as the forward split where the flange bolts are still intact. And in this case, the aft part of the edge of the flange broke away, and the forward gap, it's the forward edge of the flange that broke away, also leaving the flange bolt heads intact.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing the voice of Dr. Hans Conrad von Tilburg, who is NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries Maritime Heritage Coordinator for the Pacific. Hans is a veteran of archaeology in these waters with a variety of sites, but included in his work is work on World War II sites. One of his other projects was documenting a PBY sunk out there at Kaneohe during the attack. Hans, one of the things that you've pointed out in our discussions has been that while Pearl Harbor is the name of the attack, it certainly was much larger than the attack on Battleship Row. And I think the site that we're looking at here, 5 miles offshore, is an indication of that and of a three-dimensional battlefield on that morning, both in the air, undersea, and then across the island. Perhaps you'd want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. I used to bring that up in class that, you know, when you think about it in terms of sea floor and land, you know, we don't live on islands, we live on the tops of mountains. And everything that's fallen into the ocean or sunk or shot down or lost often remains on the slopes of that mountain. It's just covered with water and we can't see it. But for us here in Hawaii, this type of resource, naval properties from the past, it's quite extensive. It's not just the attack on Pearl Harbor. And like you say, it was an attack on all of the military installations of Oahu. But then all the training that happened in the years that followed and all of the obsolete materials that were disposed has left quite a legacy when you look at the entire inventory of what we know for naval properties in the Hawaiian Islands. You're looking at least 1,400 naval aircraft in the oceans around the archipelago and 90, 100 naval surface vessels and submarines. And that is the kind of thing, one of the things we look at to understand ourselves and our past.
Thank you, Hans. Also joining us and here with me on the ship is Frank Cantellis. Frank is the archaeologist with NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. And Frank has been key to a number of projects around our waters. This is one of the most recent one, but with Okeanos Explorer, there's been some other fascinating things, including some dives out in the far Pacific, including a B-29, and some other work. Frank, you might want to tell folks about the role of archaeology in ocean exploration.
Thanks, Jim. Well, archaeology, cultural resources in general are one of the resources that we find on the seafloor. The remains of past events, wars, merchant shipping, even pleasure craft as well. So those remains are out there, and they're a resource that we specifically look for, as well as natural resources in our program. In the past year, we've had the opportunity to visit a number of islands in the Pacific that were important theaters of war. We found a B-29 bomber off the island of Tinian that was part of
Hold and zoom in on that can.
part of the war effort, the American efforts to end the war in 1944 and 45. And we also went to Wake Island, which was actually an area where one of the early battles of World War II occurred in late December of 1941. And we discovered a Japanese merchant auxiliary vessel that served as a water tanker, an unexpected find that was sunk by the American submarine Triton in 1942. And so periodically when we go to these remote places, we have the opportunity to look for these types of resources.
Thank you, Frank. We are now at the stern of the sub and lining up. Looking forward into the gloom, you can see the conning tower just ahead of us. And we're now at the propellers. There are two of these. These are counter-rotating propellers. You can see the propeller guard. And also in this area are the dive planes. Here you get a good view of both sets of propellers.
So I'm just looking at the whole website where it shows the stern as it looked in the original dive, the very first dive on this midget sub. And these corals that you see growing on the rim, they were not there. They have since colonized the submersible in the last 14 years. It's pretty interesting. I hadn't noticed that, and I was wondering about them. I hadn't noticed them from my memory.
Yeah, that's a good observation. The other thing I want to point out to everybody is, yes, that is a Pepsi can, or some sort of a can there. And there's hardly a place we go where we do our research, even in sites that have never been discovered, where we don't find trash. One of the saddest ironies we see in ocean exploration is that while the oceans are one of our greatest museums, while it's one of our most fragile and important aspects of this planet, it is also our largest dump. And a metal can is one thing, plastics are another, and we see a fair amount of plastics. I'm one of a few scientists who have had the privilege to work on Titanic, and I can assure you there, lying on the bottom, mingled in with the debris of April 14th, 1912, is more plastic and other garbage. It is a problem, and it's a problem not only when it sits at the bottom of the ocean, it's a problem as it begins to be ingested by marine life. Our colleagues ashore in the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, in particular working at Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument, can speak powerfully to the impacts of plastics not only on the marine life but also on the seabirds. A variety of these birds ingest marine plastic. They're filled up with them. They cannot get rid of them. And these birds then starve to death and lie littered on the atolls out there in the monument. We are having an impact as human beings on the marine environment. And in the midst of a somber reflection of the history of 75 years ago, again, we're compelled to point out the fact that we continue to throw garbage into the sea.
Can you point it out on the screen?
Jim, cans and bottles roll pretty well underwater, and particularly in areas south of Honolulu where there are dredge spoils.
Yes.
And debris disposed, bottles and cans roll out of that. They can travel for miles across the bottom until they find some kind of little depression or wreck to lodge themselves against. And so, unfortunate fact, but we see the stuff rolling around the bottom all over the place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here we are 5 miles offshore, and this thing has certainly made its way along. This is not because somebody came out to the site and threw a can overboard. Terry Kirby, when you were diving on this as a sub pilot and you noticed the position of the planes, you had some observations about how this sub went down and came to rest on the bottom. We talked a little bit about that, but perhaps you'd like to share more.
Yeah, the thing that when we first spotted this on the bottom, the thing that really amazed us was that there was no depth charge damage, which, as we saw in the Monahans, washboard of the hull. And there was no implosion damage, so it sank at a rate below its operating depth that would allow it to flood, so it didn't implode. But the main thing we noticed that was pretty amazing was that there was no impact damage with the bottom. We noticed that the stern planes were in the up position, so that's why we figured it had traveled about a mile planing, and it would have accelerated until it had enough effect that it would have pitched up and then stalled. So we think that's why it ended up this far away. But when we noticed where it was laying on the bottom, the only real damage we saw was the lower lobe of the port side of the prop guard was broken away, and the lower part of the rudder was slightly bent over. So it looked like it had pitched up or stalled just before impacting with the bottom and dragged the tail on the bottom and just gently settled in without bending it. So that's how I figure it got in this excellent condition. They did this long porpoising descent before it impacted the bottom. But those forward torpedo guards were totally intact. There was not a dent in it except for that damage we saw on the tail.
Excellent point.
Another comment, Jim, in your statement about this being an undersea museum. What we're looking at here, just to the west, 550 meters west of the midget sub, is a PC-578.
Whoa, shark.
Oh, yeah, there's a, look, we're looking at a cook shark.
Oh, shark?
Sure.
Is that a shark?
Yeah, it's a cook shark. Yeah, we've seen these guys down around this area before in sub dives. They're very curious. Again, as I was saying, to the south of this sub is another a Navy sub chaser patrol craft. Is the PC-594, and 765 meters just north of this sub is the wreck of the giant seaplane Marshall Mars. So this is an amazing undersea museum just off of southeast of Oahu. Absolutely.
I think one of my favorite memories, Terry, is having been in the Pisces with you and Hans when we were privileged to join you in the discovery of the Japanese super submarine I-400, and then the USS Kailua, the former cable repair ship Dickinson, which actually was coming into Pearl Harbor on this morning 75 years ago. A reminder, there's so much that rests out here, and just the other day, Okeanos Explorer was looking at another one of your finds, doing some ongoing mapping and documentation of the U.S. submarine S-19, which had been scuttled as part of a Naval Arms Limitation Treaty commitment by the United States in 1938. So, Honolulu, you want to talk a little bit about our visitor?
So about it's a cook shark. They're not uncommon at this depth.
What do these guys eat?
Well, they would probably eat small fish and crustaceans, probably a lot of crustaceans in their diet, foraging for things that are on the bottom, swimming along the bottom. So it's one of the larger predators in this habitat, like sharks are a top predator in a lot of ecosystems. So small crustaceans and fish.
I guess it's pretty important to note here that sharks, thanks to some very famous movies, get a bad rap. But they're absolutely vital parts of the marine ecosystem, and they are at risk. And it's another reason why when we explore, we also work to try to preserve what's important in the oceans. One of the partners in these dives is NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, which is a part of NOAA that deals with America's special ocean places. Both Hans and I both work for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, as do some of our other colleagues who are joining us here from Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument. Hawaii Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary here in Hawaii protects that important species. In addition, there are national marine sanctuaries in American Samoa, at Olympic Coast off of Washington State, Cordell Bank, Greater Farallones, Monterey Bay, and Channel Islands in California, Flower Garden Banks in Texas, the Florida Keys, Gray's Reef off of Georgia, the wreck of the Civil War ironclad USS Monitor off North Carolina, Stellwagen Bank of Massachusetts, and Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary in Lake Huron. There are two national marine sanctuaries that are in the process of being evaluated for designation as well, at Mallows Bay on the tidal waters of the Potomac outside of Washington, D.C. and Maryland, and in Wisconsin, where a Morton group of shipwrecks are also under consideration. These special places protect species, protect historical resources, protect the marine environment, but are open and accessible to the public. Fishing does happen. All sorts of recreational uses happen. But by the same token, too, we work hard to do the kind of missions that we're doing here to better understand, to come up with positive, public, involved decisions on how to best preserve what is here, while also making sure they're available for the benefit of the American people. We are now heading towards the bow. Yeah. Right.
This is Bruce again. There's a small fish down toward the bottom.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. Tell us a little bit more about the fish that you spotted.
Oh, sorry. The fish was a roughy. It's off the screen now. It's related to the orange roughy that were fished down around New Zealand and in some other places. The ones that we have here in Hawaii are solitary. They don't form the big groups. But in talking about conservation, the roughies are a really good example of the need for protected areas and fisheries regulation because they're slow growing. They live 80, 100 years and reproduce slowly. It turned out that the fisheries for the orange roughy knocked down the populations and the fish weren't able to replace themselves adequately for the fisheries to be sustainable. So these deep water fisheries can be highly vulnerable to overfishing. We've seen a number of different fish on this dive so far. It illustrates the diversity of life in the deep waters. We've seen at least 3 types of eels, a fish called a spike fish that's related to the triggerfish and puffers, the cook shark that we saw. There was a peculiar fish called the jelly nose eel earlier, and there have been a lot of small fish in the water that are lanternfish and hatchet fish that are midwater fish that move up and down. And so a lot of the small fish that we've seen darting around in the water are these lanternfish.
Beautiful, thank you. You can also see that we've got modern line that's tangled up here on the periscope And Hans, team, that's a really good view. What's that suggesting to you, Terry? Hans?
Yeah, that looks to me like that was facing forward. Yeah, that looks like to me like that's the optical lens facing forward, which is what we saw with the handles and the periscope. So they must have got a glimpse of the ward, as Will Lerner observed, and probably put it forward and folded the periscope handles up, and we're trying to dive before that shot hit. Yeah, see the lens there? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great work, pilots.
That's excellent.
Beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful.
The light from that periscope is stunning.
So that line has always been a great windsock for the current conditions, and we can see that it has totally shifted during this dive from coming out of the west, now coming out of the northwest. Actually coming out of the southeast now, completely shifted around.
Pilots, before we go here, if we can sort of pan down, I'd like to take a look at the hatch. It should be directly in front of us, in front of this.
That's a great view of the top of the periscope.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Look at that. So for those,
Jeff Andy's joined us.
excellent. Good morning, Jeff. So for those of you who are watching, we are now looking at the top of the sail conning tower, and this is the only access point into the submarines, and that is through this 21-inch diameter hatch. I will say, as a younger man, I actually fit through one of these hatches. Not quite sure I could do it now, pushing 60, but what you see here as well is you see that circle with the black. That is a rubber-coated radio mast, which would be cranked up for broadcast. As well, for those of you who are just joining us live right now, we are broadcasting from the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer 5 miles off of the entrance to Pearl Harbor off the island of Oahu in Hawaii. We are diving on one of 5 Kohaoteki or Type A Japanese midget submarines that were deployed during the attack on Pearl Harbor 75 years ago today. At approximately 6:37 in the morning, 75 years ago, this submarine was spotted, tailing the USS Antares, trying to enter Pearl Harbor. It was also spotted not only by the crew of Antares, but by a PBY Navy aircraft piloted by Lieutenant William Tanner. After Tanner dropped smoke pots and Antares called the duty destroyer USS Ward, Ward went to quarters. Its crew sprang into action, and the number 3 gun crew managed to hit this submarine with a shot that went into the conning tower and then down out through the bottom. As the sub began to sink, it was depth charged and then began its glide to the bottom, coming to rest here, 1,300 feet of water. You are seeing the first live broadcast dive, other than a handful of us scientists who have had the opportunity to visit this before, sharing this with you on the occasion of the 75th anniversary as part of NOAA's ongoing work in the oceans through our Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, as well as other programs of NOAA, including the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, with its Maritime Heritage Program, with which a few of us work. What you are seeing now is that actual shell hole. This is the first shot fired by the United States in World War II in the Pacific. This shot from a 4-inch 50 caliber shell represents a frozen moment in time. a reminder that this submarine is part of a vast undersea museum, a museum that is changing through time. As you can see, this submarine has been colonized by marine life. It's corroding, and as we move along towards the bow, you're going to see that this submarine is starting to come apart. I also want to point out that this submarine is more than a historical site or an archaeological site. It is a war grave. Resting inside this submarine are two young Japanese sailors who, with their shipmates, embarked on what they felt would be a successful mission. Most likely, according to Japanese sources, Akira Hiru, Yoshio Katayama rest inside this submarine. And as we said at the start of the dive, to them, as they would understand it, with apologies for my poor Japanese, Yasuraka ni onemuri kudasai. May you rest in peace. 75 years ago, these young men and their colleagues were our enemies. Today, their country and their families are our friends. They rest in their steel coffin, ashore in the steel coffin that is the USS Arizona. Hundreds of American boys also sleep forever young. When we visit these sites, when we see these things, it takes something out of the history books and it makes it real. It makes it relevant. The lessons of Pearl Harbor, the lessons of history remain with us always, and sites like this serve to remember. We are now at the bow, and what you see coming out of the bow are two still live Type 97 Japanese torpedoes. These were the weapon to be used in the attack. These submarines were designed as a class of vessel to be launched from seaplane tenders to swarm against an enemy fleet in an open ocean all-out battle. Instead, with the attack on Pearl Harbor, 5 were selected to be used as stealth weapons, something they were not designed to be, to try to penetrate the harbor and make their way in. Only one made it, as far as we can tell. 4 others failed in their mission. 2 were ultimately found just outside the harbor entrance, one in 1951, one in 1960. This sunk by the Ward. 1 other sunk inside Pearl Harbor, recovered after the attack and now buried at the subbase. And 1 other which washed ashore on the morning of December 8th, yielding its sole surviving member, its commanding officer, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, who became POW number 1. His submarine, dismantled and studied, was then reassembled and toured the United States selling war bonds in more than 2,000 American cities, and today is preserved and displayed ashore at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas.
Are those holes new?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple things we want to do. We want to look at the torpedoes, get in close there, and then we want to go back and look at the corrosion holes and zoom in on those. Honolulu, anything you want to see as well, chime in.
What's happened?
Yeah, we were just talking about moving to the left, getting low, and zooming into this damage area. Those holes are something we'd like to peer into, and it looks like the tubes and maybe even the torpedoes themselves are beginning to be seriously compromised, as in melting away.
Yeah, roger that. We're going to start with the torpedoes, and then we're going to go to the we'll go to the corrosion holes. So what you're looking at, folks, is the warhead of a Japanese torpedo. There were 2 of these mounted, one over the other. They were fired from inside the submarine by the crew if they were to be deployed. In this case, this submarine was sunk before it could actually make it in. Directly beneath the top torpedo, you're going to see a socket for the that could have been used to mount a guard, and then below that, the second torpedo. Covering this would have been a figure 8 metal guard, also used as a net cutter. Only portions of that remain. When the sub was discovered in 2002, it was intact. Here you see a little piece of it off to one side. Just ongoing corrosion is changing this submarine, and it is gradually returning to the elements. Yeah. This is good, guys. Beautiful work.
That sort of orange large coral on the left side, if you're moving down in that direction, that might be a good one to image. That's actually a commercially valuable bamboo coral called Acanella, I think.
Okay, we'll try to get to it. So pilots, after we look at this rust, there's a coral that Shoreside wants to see. It's a bamboo coral.
And the fish that we saw at a nice close-up of earlier was the roughy that I mentioned previously.
Roger that. Thank you.
So that's
the coral right there.
That Jim
Got him. Okay.
for the torpedo guard.
So we're going to get this corrosion, and then we'll get the coral, guys.
Great, thank you. So this fish you're seeing is Limema rhodocure. It's a deepwater morid, and it's related to the cods that you see in colder areas off the east and west coast.
Thank you.
You catch any glimpse of the torpedo tubes through these holes yet, or no?
Up top, yes.
That could be. That could be, or maybe a portion of the hull that's dropped into it. That could be the tube.
I think it is the tube.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a bamboo coral. It's given its name because if you look very closely, you'll see little black bands periodically along the branches. And in this particular species, that's where sub-branches are coming out. Those black bands give it the appearance of bamboo, and that's how it got its common name. So this bamboo coral in some places of the world are actually made into jewelry. But it's pretty interesting because this coral was not on this mini sub in 2002, so it's another new colonization.
Excellent. So definitely a fair amount of change going on since the last time we were here.
Yeah, there's a lot of different biology. So it's really interesting. A lot more of these other corals that are in the family Primnoidae, the fairly common deepwater family. But just the number of corals and other animals has definitely changed, and they're more abundant.
So shoreside, we're just switching pilots right now, and we're going to do the port side.
Yeah. Can we move left a little bit and get low so we can get kind of more normal or perpendicular
Yes.
to the lower damage area?
Yes.
Thank you.
So shoreside, just so you know, we are going to conclude this dive at 7:55. And then get ready to recover and move to the three-piece. So pilots, from here we're going to go back along the port side. We'd like to do it a little lower.
Can you pan right?
Can you pan right, please?
Jim, does this seem like a breach in the main hull to you? I think we're probably as low as we can get up on that berm, so we can't get a good shot at it. But
yeah, it does.
That's a lot of scale to come off 8 millimeters of steel.
And it may be a breach.
Not the pressure hull, of course, but the hull forward bulkhead.
Yeah, look at that, Hans. It's just falling away.
Yeah, that's quite a big opening in this free-flooding area.
As well, if that's it. Do you think any of the chemicals on board might be causing this corrosion?
There's acid in the batteries.
Yeah.
But
Jim and Hans, is there any chance that this hole opened up when the bow